Hello and good afternoon from Brussels. I'm Anna-Lena Claeys-Kulik, Deputy Director for Policy Coordination and Foresight at EUA, and I will be your host for the next hour. And I'm very glad that you join us here today at the EUA webinar on universities and how they foster scientific literacy and the future of science communication. This is the second EUA webinar in a series that we started in May about universities and democracy, and where we try to explore a little bit more this relationship. We had one webinar about civic engagement in May, and we'll have another one on science advice at the end of June in 2 weeks' time. Today, we're focusing, as I said, on universities and the future of science communication. The pandemic has shown the increasing importance of making the scientific method understandable and fostering scientific literacy. So not only having the traditional approach of maybe trying to communicate scientific results, research results to a wider public, but actually trying to also make understandable that things like uncertainty and doubt are part and actually normal part of the scientific process. What does that mean for the future of science communication? How can universities and the academic community contribute to that process and actually help to really engage in a public debate? What may be the role of science communication professionals in this? All these are questions that are coming up in this discussion and that we hope to explore a little bit more today. And with that, I'm welcoming with me here my 4 speakers that will share their perspective and expertise on the topic, some from an academic perspective, from journalistic perspective, and also from a practitioner's perspective. We have with us here today David Budtz Pedersen, professor at the Department of Communications and Psychology at Aalborg University in Denmark. Marina, Tulin, postdoctoral researcher at the Amsterdam School of Communication, the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And then we have Marjan, director of the Ghent University Museum here in Belgium. And last but not least, Fabrice Rousselot, editor-in-chief of The Conversation in France. We will start with a short round of presentations by our speakers and then a short follow-up questions. And after that, we'll have some time for discussion and exchange, and we should be finished by around 3 o'clock. Before we start, I just would like to make a few housekeeping remarks. As participants, you're all welcome to share your comments in the chat that you can here see on the right side. And I see you're already very actively doing that, saying hello from all the different places you are there across Europe and actually beyond that. If you would like to ask a specific question to one of the speakers, you may post that in the Q&A section. Please don't use the chat for it, but really the Q&A section next, it's just the tab next to it. My colleague Konstantina will publish and sort these questions. You don't see her here, but she's actually very active in the back end. And we've received more than 800 registrations for the webinar, and I see, well, many of you have joined as well from all over Europe and beyond. So I hope we will have an interesting discussion and some interesting questions. And with that, I hand over to David as our first speaker. David, the floor is yours. Okay, well, then Konstantina, I would ask you to please put up Marina's slides. So we start with her and then we try to get David back and do his presentation after that.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I see nods. Wonderful. Thank you so much to the organizers, to Anna-Lena, for inviting me to speak today about an issue that I'm quite passionate about, which is science communication. And specifically, I was asked to talk about two questions. And the first one is, how can science communication foster public trust in science? And the second one is, what can universities do to support this? These two questions sound deceptively simple. And if we take them seriously, unfortunately, the answers cannot be that simple. But I will try and answer them briefly. And I hope that in the Q&A afterwards, we can engage in a bit of a critical discussion about these. All right, so here we go. Today, I will be sharing some key insights with you from a European Union-funded project that is called Tresca, where I worked as a researcher and the project coordination manager. And Tresca is short for Trustworthy, Reliable, and Engaging Scientific Communication Approaches. The project has just been concluded, and we look back at a number of quite beautiful outputs. The first one is a science communication YouTube video, which has been viewed about 10 million times and has received 600,000 likes. A misinformation widget, which is a piece of software that can help anyone detect false information online. And a number of studies with citizens, researchers, and policymakers on the question of how we can make science communication more effective in times of information overload. And if you want to find out more anything about these outputs, I invite you to visit the Tresca website, where you can find all the reports. But for today, I will focus on the two questions I mentioned earlier. And the first one is, how can science communication foster public trust in science? There is 3 concrete suggestions that come out of our project. And the first one is that people are more likely to listen when they see how research is relevant to their lives. The good news is that many researchers are motivated to positively contribute to society. However, they are not always well trained to engage with different audiences. So what can be helpful here is to receive proper training, but also to look for collaborations with professional science communicators like press offices, journalists, or digital content creators. The second point is that researchers really need to get out of their ivory tower. The times of the authoritative researcher talking down to people is over. Nowadays, citizens are aware that science is not perfect, so we need to stop and pretend that it is. I'm sure we're going to hear much more about this in the presentation of the next speaker. But just to make the point that in our project, one of the reasons our YouTube video was so successful is because we communicated in a way that was perceived as authentic, transparent, and vulnerable. Let's do more of that. And the third point related to this, we need to give people the space to form their own opinions. For many topics, especially if they are polarizing, like climate change or vaccines, people have already formed their opinions. And for better or worse, they already know a lot. And we need to take that seriously. And we need to do what we are already good at when we talk to family or friends, which is to listen and to try and understand where the other is coming from. Because after all, trust is a two-way street. Now, let's also talk for a moment about what universities can do to support this. We did a study among European researchers where we tried to understand the disincentives and incentives to engage in science communication. There was some good news. The majority of researchers said that it's a high priority for them to do science communication. At the same time, many of them mentioned some structural barriers. And these were primarily time, a lack of time, and a lack of training, skills, or the knowledge of how to engage with different audiences. Now, what can universities do concretely? Well, it seems that researchers are already intrinsically motivated to engage in science communication. 70% said they consider it their duty. 58% said that they want to positively contribute to public debates. So it seems that they don't need external incentives. However, what they do need their employers to do is to remove some of the structural barriers. And that means to compensate researchers, not in terms of money, but in terms of time. Unfortunately, nowadays, the reward structure at universities is still such that researchers get judged based on their research output in terms of academic publications. They don't get as much of a positive evaluation if they get a lot of people excited about research. And that is something that universities can do better. Many universities mention in their mission statements that they want to be knowledge institutes in society and not closed-off ivory towers. So what can universities do? They can make science communication part of the task list of researchers, just like they do with research and teaching. And that means to allocate concrete hours to science communication. And the second point is that universities can do more to support researchers in developing the skills they need to become better science communicators. We hear, especially from early career researchers, that they feel poorly equipped to engage with different audiences. This is something that can be changed at the structural level, for example, by providing more training and by embedding this in the early career development, for example, in PhD programs. What I find really beautiful about these two suggestions is that they're based on some very basic and non-controversial ideas, which is give people enough time to do their work and support them in developing the skills that they need to do their work better. So this is it from me. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this. And for now, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marina, for your very concrete insights from your research. What I would be interested in, maybe as a sort of first follow-up question, and I'm sure we have then later a bit more time to go into other questions as well from the audience, is whether you've seen from your research whether there's any difference actually between disciplines, because you said, many researchers, especially early stage researchers, are actually quite interested in communicating the science better, in learning it, but they acknowledge that they don't necessarily are equipped for that. Is there a difference between disciplines, or is this a general finding that you had in your research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for asking. The biggest differences we found was in the years of experience, so that especially early careers researchers said that they would benefit from more training. When it comes to disciplines, there's different challenges, of course. I am a social scientist myself, and in the social sciences and also in the humanities, we struggle to be seen as a real science. So often people are the experts on their own lives. And if as social scientists we come around and say, hey, we can teach you something, or we can tell you something about how you should experience your life, then this is not very well received, of course. On the other hand, in the more exact sciences, the challenge can become to translate something very abstract into something that is more relatable. So this is where I see the difference between the disciplines most strongly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I think that points already very well as well to the challenges around science communication. And I think that's a very good transition to David, who is back here now. I'm very glad that it worked out technically.
Let's see if you can you hear me this time, Anna-Lena?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, that's great.
So we're to hearing from you a bit more about what you see as the biggest challenge for science communication currently, and how you think that can be addressed from, based on the research and the work you are doing.
Sure.
So please.
So thank you very much for that, and apologies for the technical fallout, which was very mysterious, but it's good to be back into the seminar. What I'm going to talk a little bit more about is where Marina sort of stopped, namely in terms of what the humanities and the social sciences have to offer to science communication in general, and also to health and natural sciences in more specifically. And I think this discussion about the interdisciplinarity of science communication is very pertinent and relevant across the scientific landscape. So I myself, I'm a professor of science communication at Aalborg University in Copenhagen, Denmark, but I also happen to be the chair of the EU COST network on science communication. Actually, we are having our final conference next week in Copenhagen, in which we are producing the Copenhagen Declaration on European science communication, which very much will address the need to engage and integrate science communication in interdisciplinary funding programs much more upstream than have been done previously, not least learning from and drawing from some of the experiences of the pandemic. So I was asked, together with our expert group, to come up with a policy white paper last year on how to communicate science effectively in times of COVID-19. We came up with the publication that you see on this slide, which have 10 different chapters drawing on recent research in behavioral science, social science, humanities, cognitive sciences. And we are really trying to suggest different strategies and methodologies for how to communicate science in a trustful manner. And as Marina also said, taking the citizen and the life world of ordinary citizen much more seriously than have often been done in linear or deficit models of science dissemination. What we argue in the report is basically the following, namely that interdisciplinary science communication is more urgent than ever. We even state that COVID-19 was as much a communication crisis as a health crisis, and that multi-dimensional challenges such as the pandemic, but I guess also looking beyond the pandemic to the digital and green transformations, will also require multidisciplinary solutions. So when you think about dimensions or parameters such as trust, compliance, vaccine uptake, being able to have a vibrant public debate, even on technical issues where there might be unknowns and uncertainties, what we argue in the white paper is that we need to take a more citizen-centric approach to science communication than had been done previously in the response capacity. So basically this quite irritating, annoying, depressive virus has taught us a lot about science communication. There would have been no response capacity, and there would have been no mitigation strategies had scientists not been communicating across the board, whether it has been from epidemiology, from economics, from psychology, from human sciences, from cultural sciences, and of course also from experts within the medical disciplines. But basically, a virus like the current one knows of no borders between disciplines. It belongs in no discipline. We might think about a virus or a pandemic as being primarily a health issue, but basically it is not. It is quite multidisciplinary and cuts across culture, cognition, and communication. And we argue also in the report, and that will also be the basis of our conference in Copenhagen next week, that we need to learn from this more urgent open science model of communication, also looking ahead into the green transition and into the digital transition, that we need to mobilize research more proactively, and we need also to incentivize, reward, and recognize efforts to communicate science to the general public as well as to policymakers in universities more than we have done in the past. Without recognition and rewards and without funding for science communication, really it is difficult to run highly efficient and high impact science communication projects. So that's one of our major recommendations. Also, this goes for all our colleagues in the natural sciences or in the exact sciences, as Marina said. We know now from decades of research in behavioral cognitive psychology that really facts do not speak for themselves. Facts needs to be built into a narrative. We need to understand the context in which citizens, policymakers, and journalists are operating in order really to communicate research. The influence of mental heuristics, the influence even of cognitive biases, but also of ordinary values and moral statements play as huge a role in forming beliefs as do facts themselves. So there needs to be an integration of facts and values in science communication. It might sound obvious for most of us working in science communication in our everyday life, but really at the broader societal level, it is necessary to tell our policymakers and also to inform the public and inform media institutions that facts really do not speak for themselves. It calls for dialogue, engagement, and co-creation. So those are some of the points we have been arguing in our recent work. Had I had more time, which I don't, we could have run through a long list of sort of principles of evidence-based science communication. Really, this is an emergent field of study. We know more and more. Now, for the last 2.5 years, we have had an open laboratory where we could have, where we have studied both successes and failures of science communication. And I believe that a couple of take-home messages are slowly emerging that really providing information in an accessible format and using clear and shareable content as well as independent sources. And then building, as I said before, data and evidence into narratives, into value-based frameworks are some of the remedies that are important when translating research into the minds and the debates of everyday normal European citizens. So these are some of the sort of take-home messages that I wanted to get across this afternoon, and I'm very happy to take the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. That was very interesting and indeed connected very well to what we have heard from Marina before as well. I would also like to ask you one short follow-up question. You already, you developed with your work as well some principles. You outlined them at the end on the slide. But when you look at what universities can do very concretely, there's a lot of talk about fostering interdisciplinarity, and now also combining that, as you suggested, with science communication, or saying how this is important there as well. Do you have an example, maybe from the living laboratory you were talking about, how this can work in practice? Are there already examples of that at universities that you know from your work, or do you have ideas on that?
Sure. I think that it has become clear that we cannot hope for A and then just reward B. So what I mean by that is that really rewards and incentives and recognition is extremely important also at the level of university management and governance. So we are currently living in a paradigm of science policy in which we are almost exclusively putting emphasis on peer-reviewed publications, on keynote presentations at conferences, on patenting and work with companies, and then even to quite a less extent, even teaching and education. But what has been labeled the third mission of universities, namely the obligation to communicate to the wider public, is often something that gets lost in the governance of universities. And I believe that looking at the pandemic and also looking ahead into the green and digital transformations, universities simply need to move, and they need to shake things up in order to put more emphasis and more reward on successful science communication. Also, Anna-Lena, I don't believe we can leave this to communication departments or communication officers in the universities. Science communication really has very little to do with public relations. It is all about dialogue. It's about conversation first and foremost. And it's about putting emphasis on all those sort of open relations to society. At that point, I guess universities, or I believe universities, could become an agent of change, even beyond the current status quo.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we need also maybe new formats and new ways of creating that conversation, as you said. And I think that's a very good transition to the next presentation by Marjan. who will tell us a bit about, indeed, another form of a university museum, which is called the Museum of the Doubt. So we are going from trust in science and public trust in science to doubt as being part of the normal scientific process, and how you can get this message across to a broader audience. So Marjan, I'm curious to hear more about your museum and how you try to do this in Ghent. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you also for giving me the platform. I hope everybody can hear me well. Thank you for the introduction and very intriguing speeches already we've heard. I'm guessing I'm the practical example. I hope to be an example of good practices. And I present to you the Ghent University Museum, or GAM in short. The Museum of Doubt is more a nickname, I would say. And I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will understand why we call it the Museum of Doubt. We connect our mission as a museum very strongly to our university, and that's activating or coaching critical citizens of the future. So that's our mission as a museum, but also as a university. So we opened in 2020, full in the pandemic year during the lockdown. So it was a very difficult year of opening. But we finally opened in October 2020. We are located in a university campus. So within the botanical garden, so people who enter the museum or our visitors already enter a university, a campus, very vibrant atmosphere, students, academic staff, and our visitors are already mixing as soon as they enter the campus. That's already the first, I would say, strategy that we use. We want to mix our academic life with our visitors. And so I often call ourselves the Trojan horse. People don't notice that they enter a university and that they enter a scientific institution, they enter a cultural space, and then they meet science almost by coincidence. So that's also how we position ourselves. We position ourselves on the crossover between the cultural and museum fields within our local and regional and international landscape, on the crossover with that landscape and the academic landscape and our university. So we don't belong to one or the other, and that's exactly where we feel very happy. So we can claim one field or the other as it suits us. You can also clearly see that we have our own visual identity next to our university. So when we created this museum, it was very important to us that we were not going to be the marketing platform of the university. We wanted to be the marketing platform for science and trust in science. So people don't notice that they're entering this Ghent University building, but they're entering a museum space. And then the botanical garden works very well to also lower, I think, the threshold. Not, to enter a museum and a university museum is quite a big threshold to enter this campus. So the botanical garden, which is a public space, a green space, connecting space, is already welcoming, I would say. This is our baseline, the Forum for Science, Doubt and Art, and every word in this baseline is of importance. But I want to focus now on Forum, because we were talking about universities and democracy. So Forum is for us a very important word in what we try to do. So low threshold, as I said, and democratic place where we invite all kinds of voices. Also the voices that maybe don't feel well within the scientific field or a bit opposed. So we want to be this multi-perspective inviting place, multivocal place. And we do not want to advocate science as the new religion, So we are not the Museum of Scientism, where we introduce science as the savior for the future. but we talk very openly about science and mainly the scientific process, so not the outputs but the process. And we don't avoid to show the mistakes, the vulnerability, and so on. So forum means that we're not just the showcase and give a one-way information stream towards our visitors, but we also invite them to go into dialogue with us. Science, doubt, and art. So we also invite arts and artists. Artists we approach as researchers. We approach them as giving another perspective on reality with their own methods and research methods, maybe with other aims as scientific researchers, but equally valuable. The word doubt for us is important to advocate the anti-dogmatic thinking. So that's what we see that connects scientific disciplines from social sciences to the hard sciences, applied sciences, but doubt and the anti-dogmatic thinking always be open to change the hypothesis. That's really our baseline. So this is inside the museum. You can already see how we try to activate the minds. I always say we are not the activist museum, but an activating museum, activating the mind and creating those critical thinkers. We want people to leave the museum with more questions than they came in, not with answers, but we want to really make them reflect. I think you can already see that by our choices of themes. When they enter the museum, they see chaos as a word. So they don't see science as the institution of classification and order, but they see chaos. I think you can also see here the juxtaposition of the different disciplines. So we are not the museum of the hard sciences or applied sciences, which lots of science museums tend to be, but we are a mix of social sciences towards the hard sciences. We juxtapose those different disciplines in order for the visitors to take like a step back and look together with us to the scientific process and to search together with us what science is all about and how the scientific process works. So we try not to proclaim what science is, but we search together with our visitors what it is. So words like chaos or doubt and these themes are very pronounced in our displays. I think you can also see that we try to, in our scenography, that we try to create this atmosphere of intimacy. So also to really activate the dialogue. So you see a very intimate atmosphere with very dimmed lights and so on. Also to share the beauty in science. So not just the usabilities, but also the beauty and the very recognizable human sides of scientists and science. We also have temporary exhibitions. We search for themes that we can really celebrate this multi-perspectivism so that we can look at these themes from different scientific disciplines and artistic disciplines. Our running exhibition now is Phallus, but you can see how we approach this idea of forum. So it's not just the exhibition, it's also talks, podcasts, workshops, and so on. So the display is there, but it's a conversation starter with our visitors. So that was my introduction to GUM, and I hope to welcome you all soon in Ghent one day. Thank you. Happy to answer any kind of questions.
Thank you very much, Marjan. This was a very, very interesting, I think, example and illustration of actually the conversation you can create, or that also David and Marjan asked before, that one should create actually with the public. And you showed how this can be done indeed in an interdisciplinary way, because you also said that your museum isn't focused on a certain discipline and it's not focused on communicating the results, but indeed actually helping maybe the public also ease with this kind of chaos, or sometimes the unstructured way of how the scientific process works and how you actually then get to progress and results that may help you explain certain part of reality and then change it again if you get new insights. So that's actually a very, very interesting, I find. And I would like to ask you, what are the reactions of your audience, your visitors, when they come there? Do you get some reactions from them? How do they feel when they come into your museum?
So far, it's been really positive. I have to admit, we've opened in 2020, so we haven't really been fully opened during normal times. But now the tourists are coming, schools have been coming, and the response is quite positive. I think what people feel is that they enter it with a certain kind of freedom. So we don't impose neither a message nor how to experience the museum, because it's quite open, and you can also have just the aesthetic stroll through the museum. We're not really trying to push this message through people's heads, and I feel very much like that is appreciated. And that, the warm and welcoming house that we want to be, inclusive and so on. I feel like that we are succeeding in making that happen. Yeah.
Maybe just one last question before we can also go further to Fabrice. That's about sort of the visitors and the audience and the scientists you work with. Are they at ease with this kind of communication or methodology?
I would say the younger generation researchers, yes. But this interdisciplinary approach, it's still, I feel like sometimes difficult. Interdisciplinarity is important. I always say to the researchers, we don't do solo exhibitions, not of solo artists, but also not solo disciplines. So I feel some researchers feel that their disciplines are not represented enough in our exhibitions, because we always try to look for teams that search this interdisciplinarity, also look at a team from these different disciplinary approaches and how they contribute to having this holistic view on a team. But yeah, I feel that's still a long way to go for a lot of researchers to have on also to give space to the other disciplines, and this interaction between humanities, applied and hard science. It's not always very easy, no.
So there is some work still to do as well. Well, with that example, we come to another example of science communication, another, maybe channel to do that as well. And Fabrice Rousselot will tell us a bit how he combines scientific rigor with a journalistic style in the conversation in France. So we're curious to hear about your work, Fabrice.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the speakers, and thank you for the UA to organize such an important webinar. And I just took some notes. The word conversation was quoted 9 times by all the speakers so far. So I'm quite happy, because I actually work for the conversation, and our goal is to set a new conversation. And when the conversation was launched, and we're going to talk about that back in 2011, one of the motto was really to share knowledge, to make it accessible to everybody. And one of the speakers talked about those ivory towers, really to kind of get rid of those ivory towers to enter the public debate. And I always say that if the conversation had been launched 40 years ago, it wouldn't have been a success, because at that time people, scientists were less interested in entering the public debate. But today it's actually changing. And I think the new generation of scientists and academics is making a lot of effort in terms of that, and which is very important. So what's the conversation? The conversation is actually a global media group. It's a network of websites, and with a very simple, principle. All our stories we write about all kind of disciplines. It's like it's like CNN or BBC, except that it's written by academia and it's edited by journalists. So the whole purpose is basically to get in-depth analysis based on research, and also to have that collaboration with journalists, so we make it accessible to everybody, so everybody can read it. And this, this idea came out of journalistic frustration. I've been a traditional journalist for a long time, and I didn't have the idea. I mean, my friend and the founder of the conversation, Andrew Jasper, with a very well-known journalist based out of Australia. We had them kind of, where, as a journalist, you go talk to experts, you talk to them for an hour or two, and you quote 2 sentences, and that's it, and it's done, and you go to the next story. So Andrew said, why don't we help scientists, write what they really want to say based on their research, and we're going to help them do that. And that's how the conversation was born out of Australia 11 years ago, 2011. And now a conversation, as I said, it's 9 editions. It's 90,000 academics around the world working for the conversation and writing for the conversation. It's 4 different languages. It's a total, all the editions are free. There is no advertising. And we share stories with, we publish under Creative Commons, meaning that we republished today by something like 25,000 media outlets around the world. And it tells, the fact also, which for me as a journalist is very important, that people value expertise, and people value expertise today maybe more even than yesterday. When the conversation was launched again back in 2011, fake news has always been there, where was some talks of fake news, but now fake news is a prominent factor in media today. And in our own way, and there's many other people doing that, we are fighting fake news by giving expertise. And I was interested in the whole museum thing about the doubt, doubt as part of being being part of science, which is something we encountered as well when we covered the pandemic. And it was a very kind of very interesting time for us, because we were asking scientists and academics to react kind of almost on a live scale to events happening. And all of a sudden realized that for the public, doubt wasn't part of science. So a lot of our readers were saying, but scientists should know everything. And I think we have to be careful, because we have scientific facts and we have scientific postulates and everything else, and it's in premises, which is perfectly fine. But doubt is also part of science. And for us, it was fascinating to work on the pandemic, because we were working with immunologists and virologists every day to try to say, okay, what can we say exactly about a virus that we don't know, and where everything is evolving. But that's doing that kind of work on a day-to-day basis with the conversation. And as I said, we cover foreign politics, we cover national politics, we cover society, we cover education, we cover health, so all the issues. And we try actually to bring scientists together. You were talking about the importance of interdisciplinary approach, and we try to do that as well. And we think it brings a total new perspectives on different issues. So it's often we try to put together different scientists coming from different domains of research, and so we can bring some different angles, some different thinking to an issue. And this model, which is unique, of a collaboration between journalists and scientists, for us is really capital. It's very important to what we do. We work, I mean, as I said, very often, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days for an article to be ready to be published. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 months for an article to be published. And we built an ecosystem today. As I said, it's a big organization. We give, for example, we give writing workshops. So we help the scientists and the academia to find a way to structure the way they think and the way they write, so it's accessible for everybody. We talked about with them about, okay, how do you present, what angle should you choose, so we can make it accessible. So it's really about sharing knowledge, which I think is very important today. It's also about bridging the gap between academia, science, citizens, and also policymakers. I keep saying with the conversations, we're not here to publish stories on a website. We're here to have some impact, and it's very it's a very gratifying thing when we hear that some of them, and most of them, a lot of them, authors published on the conversation are asked to go on TV. They are asked to go, on kind of main media. They are asked by sometimes government to work on missions because they, the people have seen what they've published with us. So we are trying as much as we can, as I said, to be a platform for scholars, for academia, for science, because we do think today that science is way more, I've never been more important in terms of the way we look at the big, subjects of the time, from environment to health. I mean, the pandemic, I could talk about the way we worked during the pandemic for like hours, and I won't be reassured. But it was very, very interesting for us because, as I said, to have this journalistic approach and also keeping the research, keeping the way that that researchers and scientists are working at the center of what we do, it's very difficult on a daily basis. We publish, each of our websites publish something like maybe 10 to 15 stories a day. So it's a lot of discipline, it's a lot of thinking, and it's all in the benefit, we think, of science becoming part of the public debate, which I think is very, as I said, is something that's very important to the way we look at things. And we keep going and going. And I'm very happy to talk also at the EUA because, as I said, we have 9 different websites. But now we have to think in terms of continent. So we've been, working with the EUA on some issues, and the fact that we are going to launch soon in September what we call the Conversation Europe. So to bring all, because for now we have 3 outlets in Europe, one in France, another one in Spain, and the other one in the UK. So I mean, I'm not going to enter the Brexit argument right there, but I think UK, for a lot of different reasons, also are part of Europe, and they can bring a lot of things. So anyway, what we're trying to do, we're going to launch a Conversation Europe, so we can bring together all those scientists all over Europe and offer a platform to them, so they can have a voice. They can have a voice in the public debate. They can show off their new research. They can participate to the conversation on a European level. So we are very happy, to do that. We are any kind of universities, and we've had a lot of contacts of universities in Europe want to be part of the conversation. So welcoming everybody, and again, as a journalist, it's kind of, it's a nice thing to kind of say every day to yourself, okay, I'm trying to put some quality content out there, and sometimes you succeed more than other days, but most of the times we're trying to do that, and I think it's quite beneficial for science, the issue of science communication today. And I'm quite happy to be part of this adventure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fabrice, for explaining and giving us a bit of insights into how you try to indeed marry these two worlds of science and journalism, which are not always evident. That's what I sensed also from what you explained. And I would like to follow up with one question on that, because we've talked before, and this came also a little bit through the different presentations, that there are of course differences also in, let's say, the scientific cultures, depending on disciplines. There are also differences between countries, and also differences between maybe cultures and also media cultures, and then the public sphere in different countries. So how do you marry that when you talked about wanting to launch the conversation at European level? So how do you get this together? Do you actually see there are big differences in how science is communicated in different countries, and how this is done through journalism?
There are differences, and I think it's a strength rather than a weakness. And we try to understand what are the differences. We try to understand what the culture is. I mean, what's interesting in having those 9 editions, and we're independent from each other. We have one in Australia, in the UK, in Spain, in France, in Canada, in Indonesia, Africa, and on many. And for us, those cultural differences are a plus. We're trying to see when I'm in Australia at the moment, and I'm sorry because it's dark here. That's why my light is pretty bad. But we're convening here because we're sharing our own knowledge. We're sharing the way we talk and we work with scientists on different countries, and I think it brings a lot of things together. And in terms of the European launch, we're going to take all of this into account. We on many different levels, on the way we work with scientists, on the way we have discussions. We talk to a lot of people. There's for example, German scientists see science in a different way than French do. But instead of trying to play on the differences, we're going to try to bring some commonality to it, and then to bring those people together. And I think that's very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I think with that we can also open a little bit the discussion, because I know that David, you as well, with your project at COST, you worked on a European agenda for science communication, so also something at the, let's say, transnational level, and maybe we can connect to that discussion. So in your principles that you developed, do you also to what extent cultural differences in that regard actually play a role with regard to science communication, or is that something where we actually have something like a common European way maybe of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Fabrice is saying is right, that we need to take into account cultural differences, and that there is a lot of even regional and national differences, but at the same time, I don't believe we should overstate it. There are also some commonalities, and there are some best practices for actually how to talk to and with society, and how to get your messages across into a dialogue, into an exchange of knowledge, rather than only trying to convince or even persuade the public about given statements of facts or data. And I think this has, I mean, even to do with basic sort of even human nature structures in our design, that we do like information, and we do attend to information that is aligned with our prior beliefs, and we are finding people who remind of ourselves more trustworthy than people who don't. And that even comes to the very basic level of people believing in experts within their own regional communities. Even an expert can seem to be someone belonging to an elite institution, and therefore not part of us, which means that you have a breeding ground for distrust, or even to some extent polarization. And this is not something that's specific for Spain or Denmark or Norway. This is something that cuts a little bit across national differences. So yes, I think it would be wrong even for a European expert group like my own to come up with sort of universal principles. They would be very tough to translate into national practices. So we need definitely to take national differences serious, but at the same time providing some evidence and some, let's say, common frameworks or even best practices for what we can basically learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. This brings us, I think, back to a question that was posed by a couple of people in the Q&A section as well. How to actually, like, if we all agree that sort of science communication has to be made more of a part as well of the research process already, and researchers also have to be rewarded for that. That came as well at the beginning of the presentations. How to evaluate good quality science communication? What are the criteria for that as well? Is there, are there any good practices about that as well? Are there methods how to do that? Who of you would like to share some thoughts on this question?
Well, I can make a start. I think it's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking it, and thank you for amplifying it, those who have. It touches on an issue that is a bit of a broader challenge, and that is to evaluate the impact of science communication. Ideally, if science communication becomes a part of the formal tasks of researchers that are rewarded in a specific way, I think it should be rewarded in terms of the impact that these science communication practices make. However, evaluating that is really difficult. I do want to say, though, I saw that as part of the question, someone said, how do we prevent researchers from just writing walls of text? I'm a little bit more optimistic here, I believe, because I don't think it's very exciting, both for audiences to read this and for researchers to write this. And I doubt that this is what would happen if researchers are aware of the many alternative ways that they can communicate their work. So just sitting down and writing a lot is not as exciting as, for example, telling a story, talking on the radio, finding other ways of engaging. And I'm optimistic that researchers would want to do this and make use of these alternative forms of communicating.
Sorry. I can talk to that if I may, because it's exactly the work we do. And to be honest, when we launched the conversation in French, which was 2015, we got a lot of that. We got a lot of people saying, but I don't know how to write for the public. I mean, how do I do this? So it's, that's where we come in, and we try to, we give journalistics, rules, the 5 W's, where, who, when, and all of this and all of that. And in the end, and the younger generation is really, really catching up to it, and they can almost write, not by themselves, but almost like a journalist, trying to have a nice structure, present something very simple at the conversation. Our stories are not longer than 8,000 signs, which is like 1,000 words or something, around that. So a bit more, maybe 1,250 or 1,500 at the most. So we make it concise, we make it precise, we make it kind of understandable and accessible, and it's not as difficult as it might seem. So there is a lot of effort, I think, and a lot of that effort is carried by also the communication directors and the people at universities that want scientists to enter that public debate. So there's a lot of efforts on different levels, and I think it's helping a lot.
Yes, please go ahead, Marjan.
Just I want to add to that what we feel like when we approach researchers to come and share their narratives in a museum, they're not, most of the time, they're not most scared of the audience, how they will respond. They're most scared of their peers. They're always scared of their reactions, and that's not my area of expertise. I'm not sure I'm the right person to go and talk to. So I just wanted to advocate here with all the academics listening, also just be gentle towards each other and give each other enough space also to experiment in how to communicate well on science before we start to measure it and whether we do it in a qualitative way or not.
Well, if I may just add to that, I do very much agree, and also the pertinence of the question is strong. Of course, we also need evaluation standards and quality criteria for science communication, and I think we already have them. And as Marjan said, before we move on to metrics and indicators, why don't we just do what academics do best, namely use our judgment? You can build very good qualitative impact cases. You can look at a portfolio and see if it's composed of the right elements, if you're reaching the right audience, if you're getting your research across to mass media, social media, to more specific subgroups of society and to different publics. So we already have ample methods available for assessing the quality of science communication. I just think universities needs to move. It's part of the open science agenda of the European Commission to adopt more broader, let's say, evaluation frameworks. And we can simply no longer just rely on tracks of publications in American journals. It's not how we contribute value to society, at least not exclusively.
Thank you very much. I think this was actually a very good sort of conclusion already at the end, with a bit of a motivational inspiration and statement as well to universities and academics to actually also trust in doing what they do and communicating that to other audience. And don't be shy and don't be afraid of your peers and how they may sort of look at that, because you actually have all the instruments at hand already, and creating more of a conversation, to come back to that word which sort of goes like a red thread through our discussion, is actually one of the keys to do all of this. And with that, we are already 2 minutes past the hour, so we unfortunately have to stop our conversation for today. But I thank you very much to all the speakers here, and also to our audience for the interesting contributions, and also for asking the questions through the Q&A. This is of course not the end of our conversation. As I said, we will have another webinar in this series in 2 weeks' time about science advice, which actually will nicely follow from what we discussed now. There is also, of course, a connection with science communication, but there we will have more a focus on how universities and academic research contributes to advising policymakers. So not only have a conversation with society, but also contribute to evidence-based policymaking. So many thanks to all of you. There were some questions regarding the presentations. We will put them all on the EUA website, and the recording of this webinar will also be available on the EUA YouTube channel. So all of you colleagues who may be interested and haven't had the chance to listen live to us can still do this, and you're of course very welcome to share the recording. If you want to register for the next webinar, you can also do this via the EUA website. And with that, I thank you all very much. Wish you a good afternoon and hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.